The long hallway smelled of bleach and boiled starch. The walls, once painted soft cream, had dulled to a color like old parchment, their edges cracked with time. Light fell in narrow stripes through high windows, dust motes drifting like tiny ghosts in the still air. Children stood in two neat lines, their faces washed but pale, hair combed flat, clothes plain and clean. No one spoke. The only sounds were the measured footfalls of nurses, the occasional creak of wooden floorboards, and the far-off, muffled whistle of a riverboat. A nurse in sharp white, her cap pinned tight against gray hair, stepped forward with a sheet of paper. Her voice was thin but carried through the air like a thread pulled tight. Clara May. A small girl lifted her head. 10, though she looked younger, all angles and shadows. Her eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, ringed by sleepless hollows. In her arms, a cloth doll hung limp, one button eye missing, the other staring ahead. Clara's fingers clutched the thing as though it were a living creature. Beside her, another girl's hand slipped from hers. No words passed between them, only a glance, a quiet, desperate farewell that neither fully understood, but both would remember. Clara stepped forward, her thin shoes silent against the floor. The space behind her closed up, and the line moved on. A bond broken, a story ending before it had begun. The nurse turned, and Clara followed. The train platform smelled of coal smoke and wet wood. Fog rolled off the Hudson in long, curling fingers, ghosting over planks worn smooth by years of boot heels and wagon wheels. The locomotive waited, a hulking black shape breathing out puffs of gray that blurred the line between land and water. The children, a solemn procession, moved toward the open doors like cattle driven toward a pen. Each one wore a small, paper tag pinned to their collar or tied to a string around their neck. The older ones kept their heads down. The younger ones glanced back at the city's fading lights, windows like tiny gold eyes watching them leave. Clara clutched her doll tighter as an older nun approached. The woman's face was lined, her expression unreadable. In one hand she held a list, in the other a square of brown paper. She knelt briefly, tucking the tag into the front of Clara's dress, her fingers brushing cold skin. On it a name, a number, and a place no one had explained. The nun didn't speak, only gave a faint nod, then moved down the line. A whistle shrieked. The sound made the children jump. A firm hand touched Clara's shoulder, guiding her up the metal steps, slick with dew. The coolness of the rail, the hardness of each step beneath her feet, these were things she would remember longer than words. No one looked back. The doors closed. The train gave a low, mournful groan and began to move. Inside the train car, the air was thick with the scent of coal, old wood, and unwashed bodies. Rows of benches ran down either side, each filled with children. Some clung to small bundles wrapped in cloth, others to each other. No one spoke. The only sounds were the steady clatter of wheels and the occasional murmur of a younger child too small to understand. The glass of the windows was smeared with soot, the world beyond a shifting blur of green fields and distant trees. The city was already gone, swallowed by fog and distance. Clara sat alone, her doll pressed against her chest, its one-eyed face turned toward the window. Across from her, a girl about her age sat stiffly, her hair braided in a crooked plait, a tear clinging to the curve of her cheek. Their eyes met for a breath, then dropped away. There was no comfort in company here, only the shared knowledge of being unwanted cargo. The train lurched. The lamps above them swayed. No one spoke. The motion of the car, the steady clack of wheels over rails, became the only voice in that narrow world. A station passed in Pennsylvania, little more than a wooden platform and a whitewashed post office. A family waited, a father with a thick beard, a woman with a sunbonnet, a boy a little older than Clara, holding a new fishing rod. The nurse called a name. A boy rose, his shoes scuffing the floor, and followed her out. The family took him, their expressions unreadable. The door closed, and the train moved on. In Ohio, another stop. A woman with a face like weathered stone pointed to a girl with yellow hair. The girl was led out, her small bundle clutched tight. The nurse signed a paper. The woman nodded once. No one waved. At each station, faces pressed to the windows. Hope, shrinking by inches. Names were called, hands lifted. Clara's was never one of them. She kept her head down, her doll now threadbare and dark with soot. By dusk of the second day, as the sky turned to bruised violet, the whistle sounded again. It came not as a signal, but a lament, a long, wailing cry over the darkening land. Clara no longer looked when the train slowed, no longer counted the faces at the platform. Hope had quieted. In its place, a kind of waiting, not for rescue, not for kindness, just for whatever came next. The platform was nothing but splintered boards bleached silver by sun and dust. The sky hung low, a bleached stretch of gold so bright it blurred the edges of the world. Heat rose from the earth in waves, making the horizon ripple. The locomotive hissed and groaned as it bled steam into the dry, empty air. A man stood waiting. His hat was torn at the brim, a sweat-stained line circling the crown. His face was leathered, lined like old oak, and his hands hung heavy at his sides, knuckles thick, the nails black-rimmed. When the nun approached, he didn't speak. She held out a paper. He made a rough mark with a piece of charcoal and didn't look up. Clara was led down the steps, the nun's grip like iron around her upper arm. The man glanced at her once. No expression, no question, just another mouth, another pair of hands. The nun plucked a paper tag from Clara's dress and tucked it into her pocket. The girl's name vanished like a stray leaf on the wind. "There's your girl," the nun said. The man grunted, then turned and walked toward a wagon. Clara followed, the hem of her dress catching on the dry earth. Behind her, the train exhaled one last breath and began to crawl away, taking the last of New York's soot and memory with it. By the time Clara climbed onto the back of the wagon, her hands already rough with road dust, she was no longer a name, no longer a tag. She was simply the girl. The farmhouse squatted against the horizon, its boards gray and cracked, the roof sagging in the middle like a weary back. Windows shuttered against the sun, a crooked chimney belching a thin thread of smoke. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat and old grease. A woman stood at the stove, her hair pinned in a tight knot, face damp, her arms red from heat. She wore a faded gingham apron spotted dark with water and something else. She looked up as Clara entered, wiping her hands on a cloth. No words, no greeting, just a glance that landed and moved on. She pointed to a basin by the door. The water inside was the color of wood ash, a film of dust floating on top. Clara crossed the room and washed her hands and face, the grit scraping her skin. The doll was taken from her without a word, one of the boys tall, dirt-smudged, snatching it from her arm as easily as pulling a weed. He tossed it onto a shelf where old tools and cracked jars sat gathering dust. It landed face down. The woman gestured toward a pile of wood and a dented pail, then back to the stove. No explanations, no names. The house smelled of dust and sour milk. The floor creaked with every step. Through a warped window, Clara could see the field stretching forever, broken only by the bleached bones of old fence posts. No one came to meet her. No one asked where she came from. That first night, she slept in the corner of the kitchen on a bed of straw, a threadbare quilt thrown over it like a shroud. Muffled voices seeped through the thin walls, rising and falling in a rhythm she didn't recognize. Occasionally, the scrape of a chair, a door closing. The meal had been a slice of dry cornbread and cold beans eaten at the edge of the table after the man had finished. No one spoke to her. No one noticed if she ate. The kitchen windows, their glass rippled and old, let in the silvered light of the moon. It cast a pale square on the wall, moving slowly as the hours passed. Clara lay on her side, her face turned toward the wall, her hand curled around nothing. The doll still lay on the shelf, its one remaining eye reflecting a sliver of light. The house settled in the night, a soft sigh of old wood, the ticking of cooling stones, the long hush of the prairie wind pressing against the house. She did not cry. There was no sound, only the breathing of a house full of strangers and the wide, indifferent sky. The roosters began before the sun cracked the horizon, their calls slicing the dark like rough-edged blades. Clara woke to the sharp sting of cold air on her skin and the heavy scent of wood smoke and bacon fat. A boy, no older than Clara, dragged a pail from the well, his bare feet caked in dirt, a slingshot hanging from his pocket. He didn't look at her. In the kitchen, the woman moved between stove and table. Her movements were rough, but practiced. Bacon hissed in a cast-iron pan. The bread from yesterday was broken into chunks. A blackened coffee pot spat thin liquid into tin cups. 12 men filed in from the yard, their faces dark with dust, clothes stiff with old sweat. They sat heavy on rough-hewn benches. 1 or 2 spit tobacco into a jar. No one spoke to Clara. The woman worked. The men ate. And Clara watched. The smell of frying bacon thickened the air. The stove radiated heat. She watched their hands, rough and cracked, how they held their forks like tools. She felt the sun rise against her back through the window, the sky turning from bruised purple to the bright, unforgiving white gold of harvest. No one said her name. No one asked what it was. The boy from the well grinned once at her, crooked teeth flashing, then turned away. The house and fields closed around her like a box. The day began, and she was simply there. The days slipped one into the other, smudged and shapeless. The fields turned from green to gold, and Clara learned the weight of a kitchen before she learned the land. Morning started in darkness, the hush before the roosters, before the clatter of boots and the scrape of chairs. The stove took forever to wake, and the air tasted of ashes and scorched iron. The bread came first, heavy dough worked against a wood-plank table, the knots in the grain cutting faint lines into her palms. The bitter coffee followed, thick as tar and twice as mean. She learned the rhythm of the knives, how to peel potatoes without wasting flesh, how to slice fat back for the pan. Her hands blistered, the skin split, and the soft burn of lye soap stole what was left of softness from her palms. Her hair darkened with soot and grease until it no longer shone. The woman said nothing, only pointed. The work spoke louder than voices. The men came in at noon, heavy with sweat and dust, their laughter rough as stone against metal. They spit into the corners of the room, broke bread with thick fingers. One grinned at her once, a grin full of yellow teeth and flies. She kept her eyes low. At night, Clara curled beneath the table, the earth beneath her thin mattress cool against her skin. The house settled, with sighing with age. The scent of soil clung to her hair, and the prairie wind pressed against the shuttered windows, carrying a sound like distant weeping. By mid-July, the skies broke. The air, heavy for days, split with a sudden scream of thunder. Rain poured in fat, blinding sheets, the kind that turned dirt roads to rivers and made the fields dance. Clara was outside, pulling linens from a line, the wind yanking them like sails. A boy's voice called through the storm. Will, the boy from the well, his face streaked with mud, hair plastered to his brow. He shouted something she couldn't catch, a warning or a curse. A sheet tore free and tangled around her shoulders. She fought it, slipping in the mud, the fabric a living thing in the storm. What was beside her then, his hands grabbing the edge, both of them pulling against the wind's teeth. The rain stung her eyes, her skin cold and raw. For a moment, their eyes met over the white cloth. Not quite kindness, not soft. Something older, a flicker of knowing. Weariness too heavy for their years. No words passed between them. No need. They wrestled the sheet free and pinned it to the fence post, the storm's fury turning to a steady roar overhead. In the breath after, the world smelled of wet earth and iron, and then the moment was gone. The letter came on a dull, baked afternoon. A boy on horseback, dust trailing behind him like smoke. He tossed it to the woman at the gate, and was gone before the dust settled. Inside, the house was still. The men gone to the fields, the stove banked to coals. The woman opened the letter at the kitchen table, her hands rough and chapped. She read it silently, her jaw tight. A single name rose from her lips. Clara May. The girl froze by the basin, her stomach knotting, her pulse a sudden, frantic flutter. No one had spoken her name in weeks. It sounded strange now, too large for the room, too sharp in the stillness. The woman's eyes flicked up, then down. She crumpled the letter, shoved it into the stove's mouth, flames licking at the edges until the paper shriveled, blackened, and was gone. Clara watched the smoke rise, thin and gray, carrying the ashes of her name. She turned back to the dishes. She did not speak. Harvest bled across the land like fire, turning the fields into oceans of gold and dust. The air thick with chaff, sweat slicking every inch of skin. Clara rose before the sun, moving through the kitchen in darkness. The stove crackled, dough rising under the heel of her palm. Coffee boiled in a dented pot. 12 plates, 12 spoons, 12 coarse voices waiting. The house filled with rough men, skin burned brown, hands like old rope. They ate and spoke in low grunts, eyes red from heat and dust. Clara kept to the edges, a wraith in threadbare gingham. Will pass by once, a bundle of wood under his arm. He set something by the basin, a small, crooked wildflower. Its stem bent, the petals sun-bleached white. Clara's hand brushed it as she reached for a cup. She didn't look up, didn't speak. Left it there, where the dishwater could carry it away. Some things you didn't dare hope for, even small things. The work went on. The sun climbed. The men returned to the fields, and the kitchen fell silent, but for the hum of flies and the steady rhythm of the bread knife. The final weeks of harvest came with a thick, choking dust that clung to every surface, to every fold of fabric, to the inside of mouths and eyes. The air shimmered, brittle and dry, and even the nights no longer brought relief. Inside the house, the stove never cooled. The kitchen walls sweated, and the smell of old grease and boiled beans seemed baked into the floorboards. Clara moved through it like a shadow, slipping between the clatter of dishes and the scrape of boots without drawing notice. The men's laughter rolled through the rooms like thunder, loud and careless, a wall she could never cross. No one called for her. No one spoke her name. The woman at the stove grew paler by the day, her voice rough, her breath shallow. Then, one evening, a cough burst from her chest, so sharp it doubled her over. Clara paused with a stack of plates in her hands, but no one else looked up. That night, the woman did not rise for supper. She lay in the back room, a basin by her bed. The house quieted around her absence. The kitchen was Clara's now. The heat, the noise, the endless work, all of it hers. And no one told her otherwise. The stove roared, flames licking high, the iron belly growling. The air in the kitchen thickened with steam and smoke. Clara moved from pot to pan. Her hair stuck to her face, her cheeks red from heat. 12 men waited, their voices low, shoulders heavy with dust and the ache of long days. The bread rose in the oven, the stew thickened over the fire, and the tin cups of bitter coffee lined the table like dark soldiers. Will stood in the doorway, his face half hidden in the dim light. He watched her with wide, unreadable eyes. Not a word, not a question, just the steady hum of crickets and the clatter of spoons against wood. The stew filled the room with its heavy scent. Clara ladled it into bowls, filled each plate, never lifting her gaze. No one spoke to her, but none of them rose from their places. They ate what she made, and the kitchen did not burn. On a Sunday dusk, as the field stretched bone-dry beneath a sky streaked with purple, the men gathered around the long table. The meal was simple, bread, stew, and a pie baked from the last bruised apples Will had found at the edge of the orchard. The heat of the day clung to the walls. The windows stood open, the scent of dry grass drifting in. The men ate in silence, the scrape of spoons and the occasional grunt, the only sounds. The weariness of weeks etched into their faces, into the slump of their shoulders. Will raised his cup once, a crooked grin breaking through the grime and sunburn. His eyes met hers, and for a breath, something passed between them, a kind of crooked peace. One of the older men slapped a hand to the table in approval, sending dust leaping. The others grunted and nodded. No one called her Clara. No one called her anything at all. But she belonged here now. Not as a name, not as a girl, as part of the house, the field, the dust, the air thick with heat. She was a thing they needed, and that was enough. The night was wide and deep. The sky above the porch sagged beneath a blanket of stars, sharp and bright as old glass. The land stretched out in all directions, silent and waiting. Clara stood alone at the porch rail, a chipped cup still warm in her hands. The fields, so loud by day, hushed into a restless sleep. Crickets hummed in the grass. The barn's roof gleamed silver in the starlight. She hummed a tune, soft and shapeless. A string of notes no one had taught her. A melody older than memory, built of long roads, lost names, and the scrape of wind against bare wood. The doll still sat on the shelf inside the house. Dust gathered in its one-button eye, its cloth body, sagging with the weight of time and neglect. Clara did not reach for it. The wind stirred the grass, carrying with it the scent of dry earth, of harvest done, of things buried too deep for words. She was not free, not lost. She simply was. And the night did not ask her name.